Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dan, and I am back with another preseason GLDL Season 2 power ranking, this time for the Squirtle division. Squirtle division is going to be one of the two max format divisions, and the power rankings will reflect that. So the methodology for these power rankings, coach and playstyle are not taken into consideration, so if I know that you are a really good player with a team that probably suits your playstyle, I'm only going to be looking at the team, not taking your status as a player or how well you probably know that style of team into consideration. The way I'm doing these rankings are if 100 equally skilled players were given each team and then asked to play every matchup against one another in a massive round-robin tournament, this is what I would expect the final standings to be from those matches. And a higher ranking does not necessarily mean I believe that team would be favored over a lower-end one. For example, the number 2 team could be a 60% favorite over number 1, but against the rest of the field, number 1 could have a 60% win rate compared to number 2's 54% win rate, justifying number 1's position because they would have a higher final standing. But moving on into it, the number 12 ranked team in the division, in my mind, is the Boston Bisharps. This team has a Moongus, Colossal, Bisharp, gotta love the mascot pick, Frostlass, Gothorita, Altaria, Basculin, Dragonite, Mimikyu, Vikavolt, and Wartortle. So let's start with what I think the biggest potential problem is with this team, and that's over-reliance on Colossal and not a consistent way to activate it. Like, yes, you have a couple Surf or Aqua Jet options, but I don't think any of them are going to be the most consistent ones. And outside of that Colossal, your offensive output isn't great. You have functionally Vikavolt and Dragonite, and then Bisharp if you can get it going. But those two alone can't really offensively carry an entire team. And while you have a Moongus, which is a great support option, I find a Moongus to be a bit worse in draft than it is in other matchups because almost every opponent is going to have at least one Pokemon with safety glasses specifically for the Amoonguss, and that's going to make your redirecting and sleeping harder and less consistent than it would be if you were using it in standard VGC. So on the whole, you can definitely see what this team's going for. You can see a backup Trick Room mode that I think is actually the best mode on the team with Mimikyu Vikavolt. But when I think the best mode on the team is Mimikyu Vikavolt, I have to give the team the number 12 spot in the power rankings. At number 11, we have the Silver City Sylveons. So the Sylveons are a interesting collection of Pokemon. You've got the Reginald, which is the fastest thing in the format, great Pokemon. Rotom Heat, which doubles up on that electric typing, but it provides some other things as well, and is immune to ground types. And I think the other things that are really good on this team are obviously the Dracovish. Without Sand, it's not quite as good, but Reginald to throw some Electro Webs down for it can still let it go first sometimes. Duraludon, and then the Serena. I think those are the best parts of this team. But the rest of the team is just a little suspect to me. The speed control outside of the Regieleki doesn't look great. You obviously have the Tailwind and Trick Room option from, I don't even remember the name of that Pokemon, but you do have some speed control, but it's going to be very inconsistent. You don't have redirection. You don't have weather for the Dracovish. Like, yes, does the team have a lot of potential damage output? Yes, it does. And I do think that your top 6 Pokemon, maybe if you count the Alchemy, which I do think is underrated in max formats, are going to give you a lot of potential damage output here, but there are just some slots that I'm not sure about. And then the biggest issue I have with this team is typing, actually, because you've got multiple fire types, you've got multiple electric types, you've got multiple bug types, and I just think overall the team is just a little bit too soft to something like a ground type move. Like, yes, I know the Rotom Heat has Levitate, but there's just some questionable weaknesses throughout for this team, and although I like a lot of the pieces, I'm not sure if it's a coherent team as much at this point, and I do think it has a lot of potential, but for now I'm going to have to put it at power ranking 11. Starting at 10, this is where things get really interesting. So we've got Reginald. So obviously Indeedee and Glastrier and Reuniclus are the highlights of this team, right? Like that right there. Super powerful mode, super consistent mode. You're just gonna try to get your Ice Horse in the best possible position and try and let it go off. So that right there is incredibly powerful, and I had this team higher at first, but then I started looking at the rest of this team. Like, okay, let's say your opponent shuts down Trick Room. What do you try to do? Well, at first I'm like, oh, it's got Tailwind Noivern, and then it can go fast. And then I'm looking at what's going to take advantage of this Tailwind. Arcanine, that's not a lot of damage output. Like, that's more of a support piece that can flex into, like, a moderate damage output, but that's not going to win you the game. Melodic, unless you're getting a competitive boost, that's not a lot of damage output. Same with the Machoke. Maybe Light Ball Pikachu, but overall, I just don't think the modes outside of this Trick Room mode are that great. Like, is the Trick Room mode great? Yes, but if you only have one great mode and your opponent shuts it down, you're really going to struggle. And this is probably a bit of personal bias, but I don't think Chansey Shuckle is a legit strategy in draft because you're going to have an opponent that preps for it. It works on ladder as a shock factor because you're not ready for it. But if those are 2 of your 11 Pokemon, and your opponent knows they could come any given week, they will have an answer for Chansey Shuckle, and it becomes a lot harder to pull off in draft, I think. So, overall, I was higher on this team initially, but I just think that outside of the Trick Room mode, which I cannot state enough how good that Trick Room mode is, it's just missing a few pieces to really make this team exceptional, and that's beyond the potential item pressure with 3 not fully evolved Pokemon, a lot of things that probably want Focus Sash. So I have them at number 10. I could see this being really, really low for this team, and yeah, that's just sort of where I am right now. But at number 9, we have Ultimate Unburden. Okay, this is where teams start getting really unique. So this is a collection of a lot of really good Pokemon. Like, even the Noctowl, it doesn't really have resisted attacks because any resisted attack with Tinted Lens will do 2 times damage. It'll still hit like neutral, even into a not very effective attack, which is a really cool place to be for Pokemon. But the Latios, Rotom Wash, the Metagross, the Weezing Gourgeist, Regigigas, like, these are all solid Pokemon. So why is this team number 9 and not, say, number 2? Well, I think my first issue is consistency of speed control. There's no redirection on this team, and Latios you really want more as an offensive option than a Tailwind setter, even though it can be a Tailwind setter. And then, so I just don't think Tailwind is going to be super consistent from this team. And then the Trick Room setter Gourgeist, I think Gourgeist is actually pretty good, but again, it's pretty quick, and your Trick Room mode is actually probably a little too fast. I don't think there's anything that's base speed 30. I don't know throws off the top of my head, so I might be wrong there. But everything's just a little quick. So then we look at the other modes. Weezing and Regigigas. You know that that's a powerful mode, but also in draft, it's easier to prep for. Which is sort of a consistent theme with these lower ranked teams. So it's a powerful mode that's easier to prep for, and it's not very flexible in the way that you want to set it up or approach it. Then you've got the Rotom and the Metagross and the Latios. So I think that's probably the best mode, but they're just a bunch of strong pieces individually. I don't know if they really work together the way that you want them to work together, and that's sort of where I am with this team. There's a bunch of strong pieces, a bunch of 2-part synergies you see, but I don't really see a bunch of ways that 4 Pokemon come together super coherently outside of a Weezing Gigas mode lead with something like Latios and Rotom or Metagross Rotom in the back. But then you're almost forcing to max Regigigas, and in draft, like I said, Regigigas is much easier to handle than it is on the normal ladder. So that's why I have this team at number 9. At number 8, we have the San Francisco Scizors. So this was a team I was really high on at first, and I think it speaks to the teams above it that it's not higher. Because Tapu Lele, Zapdos G, Hippowdon, Excadrill, Hydreigon, Dusknoir, Berserker, Starmie, Thwacky, Slurpuff, Rapidash. Like, there are a lot of things I really like on this team. It's got the obvious Sand mode. It's got the obvious support to the Sand mode with the Zapdos and Lele working really well with it. It's got a functional Trick Room mode with Berserker and Dusknoir, although I do think Berserker is better in non-max formats than in max formats. Starmie is underrated. It's got some terrain control and an Unburden mode, but that's probably pushing it if he brings those to too many matches. And then Rapidash is okay as a tier 5 option as well. So, like, just all those things I mentioned. I mentioned every Pokemon as a net positive for this team. The biggest drawbacks I see for this team are consistency of speed control and then just being really soft to Will-O-Wisp and other burning moves. I wouldn't say to intimidate, but Will-O-Wisp is definitely something that it's soft to, and it just shuts down so much of this team's offense. Like, if you have something with Will-O-Wisp, you can shut down the Berserker, the Excadrill, the Zapdos, to some extent the Hippowdon, and the Dusknoir as well. Then you might say, well, Hydreigon Lele's a mode then, and yes, but Hydreigon has that sort of quad weakness that can be prepped against in draft if you're being forced into it consistently because of Will-O-Wisp, and Lele is very good. Don't get me wrong there, but it's a bit more frail than you think it is, and its speed doesn't quite get to the speeds that you want it to at its bulk. Do I think this team is going to finish 8th this season? No, because I know Matt is an exceptional player. But having to rate this team just on the merits of the team, while I really like it, I have to keep it pretty low, and I think that speaks a lot to the teams above it. Because teams 5 through 7, I had in basically every possible configuration of order, but we're going to go ahead and look at what I have at number 7 in those teams. So we have the Lake Erie Wishiwashis with Cinderace, Regidrago, Braviary, Passimian, Executor, Magneton, Herdier, Sandaconda, Blastoise, Clefairy, and Cloyster. So let's start with what this team's good at. It's good at Clefairy Cinderace, Clefairy Regidrago, Clefairy Braviary, Clefairy Blastoise, Clefairy Cloyster, and probably Cinderace Regidrago as well. Everything hinges on the Clefairy on this team. All the Clefairy modes are really good, don't get me wrong, but everything hinges on the Clefairy, which is why I had to put it lower than the two teams above it, which are both, I think, actually really similar to it. Because the Clefairy is going to be really taunt baity early, or it's going to just eat a Steel Spike and go down. And if that happens, this team is considerably weaker. But otherwise, you see what this team's trying to do, and it's going to be hard to prep for because there are so many potential modes with it. But they do all focus on that Clefairy as well. And the support pieces on the right side, I don't think are quite as good as the offensive pieces on the left side. Passimian I've seen be underwhelming. Sandaconda, Executor, Herdier, and Magneton's actually pretty good. I will give him Magneton being very, very good. But the four just to the left of Magneton, I'm going to have to see why they're on this team because I don't think they quite complement the rest of the team as well, which has me put this at number 7, just barely underneath the number 6 team, which is the Chambana Shellos, which is, again, Clefable for the redirector with Scizor, Riolu, Mantine, Persian, Lurantis, Cryogonal, Dragapult, Crocodile, Magmortar, and Duosion. So, why am I slightly higher on this team? Because I think Clefable's better than Clefairy. I think Scizor, Dragapult, and Crocodile are actually going to be a bit more flexible than the offensive options on the other one, and I think the Riolu mode provides a non-Clefable mode that's going to be pretty good. Oh, and Max Mantine with redirection is insane in Max Draft. So, this team I think is going to be slightly better than the team underneath it, but I do think that the biggest weakness with this team is a really, really suspect Trick Room mode. Duosion's probably going to want the Violence to the Mental Herb, which makes it taunt bait and really hard to get Trick Room up. And even if Trick Room does go up, although I do like Lurantis under Trick Room, I don't think it's insane under Trick Room. So I think the Trick Room mode on this team is just a little bit soft, but otherwise I think it's very solid. You see what it's trying to do. The pieces work together. But I do only have it at number 6 because at number 5 we've got the Snowbelle Blizzards, which again we've got the Togekiss, we've got the Tier 1 Fairy Redirector, but this time with the Primarina, Gothitelle, Sneasel, Steelix, Rhydon, Flareon, Spectrier, Aerodactyl, Gallade, and Rotom Fan. So this team knows what it's trying to do, right? You have the option to get fast Tailwind, you have the option to just lead Togekiss plus Spectrier, which I think is an insane lead. You can max Togekiss, you can have a redirecting Togekiss. Primarina is great under either form of speed control, and the team offers both forms at a slightly higher level than the previous team. And then I'm not exactly sure what the Sneasel's doing. Like that's the one thing on this team I'm not 100% sure what it's doing. Like, yes, I know it can beat up the Gallade, and that's a mode you have to threaten, you have to prep for, but I don't think that's what this team wants to be doing on a week-to-week basis. But I guess it is something that you have to prep for. So I will give it that. But overall, I think this team's speed control options are slightly better than the two teams under it, which is why in this 5 to 7 clump I've got it at the 5 group. And I think Spectrier plus Togekiss is actually the most threatening lead that any of the teams in the 5 to 7 clump can come up with. So again, I think the Snowbelle Blizzards just edge out the other two to take the number 5 slot. At number 4, we have the Tennessee Talonflames, coached by Toxic. So I will admit a bit of bias. This is a Coco Thievel team, and anyone who knows me knows I think those two are really good together in draft. But I do think Landorus, and Araquanid, Tangela, Bronzong, like those are just some really great options with it. Then you even have a coaching option with Hitmonchan. You can coach your Tapu Koko. Lopunny is a decent support option. Coughing exists. And Avalugg, I don't think is great on this team. I've seen it do well in leagues before, but I don't think this is the team for it. And then the Archeops, I guess you could have Archeops, Coughing, but Archeops is probably going to be a Tailwind setter a lot of the time with some damage output. So the goods on this team, like there's the obvious terrain mode, there's the obvious synergy between Coco and Landorus, and then there's the obvious secondary mode, which is a Trick Room mode as well. And Tangela works as a redirector pretty well on this team. So what are the cons on this team? I think the speed control for going fast is just slightly below where it wants to be. Like, yes, you can just start max airstreaming with Coco, and that is fine, because if you have a Coco Thievel lead, you don't need Tailwind. But if you're going for something like a Landorus, maybe a faster Araquanid setup, then you want the Tailwind. It's not a need, it's a want, but that's at the point where we're leveraging, like, does this team have this, tertiary mode that's as good as the tertiary modes of the teams above it? And I think the tertiary mode, which is the Tailwind mode, is going to be slightly below where it needs to be for this team, and that's my only critique of this team. Otherwise, I think it's really solid, really well put together. Araquanid is going to be great with this proven core on this team, so I'm excited to see what Toxic does. Up next, we have the St. Louis Infernapes. So this is tricky lead team, right? So you've got Whimsicott, which can lead with anything. Are you going to lead the Whimsicott Cobalion, threaten beat up stuff? Are you going to lead the Whimsicott Dracozolt, threaten to have a Hustle Dracozolt with Tailwind? Are you going to lead Dracozolt with Gigalith, have a threaten a fast Dracozolt that can either max or not max? Are you going to lead, Fungus with the Oranguru and threaten to actually go into Trick Room for Caracosta Gigalith, especially that Gigalith? Are you going to lead Whimsicott with the Moltres and just say, I'm going to fake Tears and Airstream as my speed control, and I'm just going to start killing stuff? Like, there are a lot of really tricky things this team can do. So I like a lot of it initially at first glance. If there are some critiques, I'd say the Whimsicott and the Purloin are a little bit reductive to one another. I know they can do some slightly different things, but maybe one of those slots could be something else. But otherwise, this team looks really solid, top to bottom. A lot of defined modes, a lot of flexible Pokemon like that Stoutland as well. But I think the leads on this team are just going to make it really threatening, which is why I have it at number 3. But at number 2, we have the Shadow Ducks. I will say the reason this team is number 2 instead of number 1 is I'm not going to talk about Grookey or Dottler, and they don't deserve to be talked about. But the rest of this team, we've got the Urshifu, Entei, Weavile, Virizion, Mr. Mime, Klinklang, Fletchinder, Moltres, and Comfey. So, let's start with the good. Comfey Moltres, Comfey Urshifu, Fletchinder with anything, Weavile next to the Virizion, Comfey next to the Virizion potentially. Like, there's a lot of threatening leads here, and I think this team just works slightly better than the team below it in terms of a combination of leads and pieces to support those leads, because it's not just the lead.team, because you've got that Entei that can come in and do a lot for this team, as a bit of offensive and support options without putting any more Dynamax pressure on this team. There's no Dynamax pressure from the Urshifu either. It doesn't really need to max. So the max options you're looking at primarily probably the Virizion and the Moltres, and Moltres is a phenomenal max option, and something like the Comfey is going to be a great partner for it. Even something like the Entei, if you get it in next to it, then you're threatening from a lot of different sides, and then you do have that priority tailwind from the Fletchinder as well. This team's biggest potential weakness is the Trick Room mode, but it can reverse Trick Room with Klinklang, but I think that weakness in the Trick Room and then the Dottler and the Thwackey are what keep this team out of the number 1 spot for me. So my number 1 spot goes to the huge Power Bros, who have Garchomp, Suicune, Aromatisse, Mienshao, Manectric, Miltank, Magmar, Celesteela, Umbreon, Haunter, and Cherim. This team is insane in a max format. First of all, you got Celesteela, which is probably one of the top 2 Pokemon in the format, from my perspective, along with the Glastrier, but you've got a really good support option with it with that Manectric. You've got a way to threaten Trick Room with the Aromatisse, but I think the only downside to this team is the Trick Room mode actually isn't that fleshed out, like you just have Aromatisse. But man, the fast mode on this team, Garchomp plus Water-type Suicune plus Steel Flying Celesteela, that core is absolutely insane. Steela's only weaknesses are Fire and Electric. Garchomp's immune to 1. Manectric can redirect 1. Garchomp resists Fire. Suicune resists Fire as well. Garchomp is weak to Ice, but Suicune can switch into the Ice-type moves. Garchomp is weak to Dragon, but Celesteela can switch into the Dragon. Like, the offensive and defensive synergy of this team and the just overall power level is completely insane. Like, this, to me, is the clear number 1 team. I do wish the Trick Room mode was slightly more fleshed out, but you know, you've also got great support option Umbreon. You can coaching anything with Mienshao. Like, you could have physical Steela coaching. You could have a max Garchomp you're coaching. There's just so many options for this team, and I think it really works well together. And to plug my Type Core video, man, Garchomp, Suicune, and Celesteela is a phenomenal Type Core that would fit my video really well. So that's why I've got the huge Power Bros at number 1. So the final power ranking standings, again, these are not predictive, these are just for fun and how I think the teams would work in a completely neutral environment, so not at all like what's actually going to happen in this league. I have the huge Power Bros in the Shadow Ducks, St. Louis Infernapes, Tennessee Talonflames, Snowbelle Blizzards, Chambana Shellos, Erie Wishiwashis, San Francisco Scizors, Ultimate Unburden, Reginald, Silver City Sylveons, and Boston Bisharps. So if I talked about your team and you think I got something wrong, or you see another team that you think I missed something on, just let me know in the comments below. And if you like this type of video, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'm looking forward to seeing what this division does this season in the GLDL, and I will see you guys next time with some more power rankings. Bye.